Hey there, fellow travelers, Mark here with Wolters World, and today we're back in the Great White North of Canada. And today we're going to talk about are some of the things that tourists do when they come to Canada that kind of upset the locals. Because we all want to be great travelers. We don't want to be that ugly tourist that does stupid things and upsets the local when we don't realize we do something wrong. And so I want to give you some of the kind of typical things that tourists do that upset the Canadians. And I think the first thing, and if you look online, people say, oh, call them Americans, that's going to upset them the most. Well, it's not necessarily calling them Americans that upsets them. It's more not noticing or acknowledging or appreciating true Canadian culture and how Canada is really its own distinct country, its own distinct culture with its own people. It's not just the politics and maple syrup and hockey. No. There's so much more that makes Canada Canada. Their melting pot is very different than the melting pot of the US or other places around the world. And not appreciating the differences of Canadian culture is really what hurts them. So that's the first thing. It's just not appreciating the Canadian difference that's out there. But yeah, the second thing that'll really piss them off if you tell them they're Americans or you're in the 51st state. Yeah, that will still get them. But just want to give you kind of the background on that one, okay? Now, the next thing that might upset the locals when you're here is if you try to imitate a Canadian accent. You know, if you want to say sorry, I said something, sorry, or you want to sound like you're, Bob and Doug McKenzie from back in the day, right? Some strange group. Here's my two, can I go? Let's go get a 2-4. Look. Don't imitate the accent. No one appreciates that. No matter where you are in the world, people don't appreciate when you mock their accents or mock their vocabulary, and this is no different here in Canada. So as much as you want to say a to a thing or sorry, I mean, you can say sorry, I'll talk about that later, but just in general, mocking the accent and stuff, that might put people on the wrong foot with you, okay? Now, another thing that's a really touchy subject with Canadians that you might not know about if you're not from here is that's if you kind of bring up the fact that Tim Hortons just hasn't been the same since it changed ownership. I mean, Tim Hortons is like, it's a thing here in Canada. It was like the place you went to get your coffee and your Timbits, your little donut holes. It was just like a truly culturally Canadian thing. It was something we were proud of. And then it kind of changed ownership, and now it's still better than Starbucks, I think. And it's a very touchy subject for people in Canada, so just be aware that if you bring up Tim Hortons or you make jokes about it, they'll probably bring up the fact that Timmy's, it's not what it used to be. Now, another thing is, it doesn't matter if you're at Timmy's or you're anywhere, another thing that's gonna upset the locals is if you line jump or queue jump. Look, here in Canada, line culture is a thing. I mean, I was at the Montreal train station a few days ago waiting to get my train. The line to get on the train, no joke, single file line, went the entire length of the hall, the Great Hall, and then around a hallway as well. And everybody was very nice and waited their turn and everything. And line culture is very much a thing here. And if you jump the line, oh, people are gonna be upset with you. They might say sorry and get your attention, but yeah, that's something you don't do here, okay? And I know I keep saying sorry and things like that, but I think sorry is another thing that will upset the locals if you don't say you're sorry. Because Canadians are actually very nice people and they're very polite. And so yes, they do use sorry a lot and they do say excuse me a lot and all kinds of stuff, but yes, sorry is a thing. So if someone tells you sorry, it's okay to say sorry back. If you bump into somebody, sorry is an answer. If you accidentally order wrong or you want something else, oh sorry, could I get some more ketchup? Sorry is a word you need to use when you're here, so don't forget your manners, because nobody wants a mannerless tourist. And speaking of a mannerless tourist, another thing that might upset the locals is if you don't tip your waiters. Look, a lot of people, we have so many comments on our videos about tipping in the US. People get so upset about it, but you know what? Here in Canada, they tip as well. You tip between 15 and 20%. And the thing is, when you tip with credit card, they're pretty slick. They'll give you an option with the machine, 18%, 20%, or 22%. But tipping is a thing here in Canada. They do it. You need to do it too. It doesn't matter if in your home country, oh, we don't tip, or I don't believe in tipping. Tipping is wrong. It doesn't matter. That's how people make a living here in Canada. Here in Toronto, it's not cheap. You need those tips to survive, okay? So don't be a jerk, cheap tourist. Pay the tips, tip your waiters. Now, the fact that I'm filming this in front of a Toronto sign, in front of the Toronto City Hall, might upset some other Canadians that are watching this. And I gotta tell you, if you think Toronto is the end-all be-all of Canada, like the only thing that matters in Canada, the only place you've been in Canada, and you think, oh, Toronto is everything Canada, oh, that's gonna set some people off. Because I'll be honest with you, Canada is so varied. I mean, remember, it is an entire continent wide, okay? And if you're in PEI, you're up in Nova Scotia, Atlantic provinces, if you're in Quebec, if you're here in Toronto, if you're going out to Saskatchewan, you're going to BC, I mean, it's so different everywhere you go. And if you think it's just this big city represents everything Canada, that's going to upset people that aren't from Toronto. Now, the Toronto people will be like, well, yes, of course, Toronto is the best. but honestly, that's something that's not going to go over well, especially if you're in Montreal, okay? So just know, Canada's got some great variety that you should enjoy. Now, another thing that tourists around the world might do if you want to kind of poke fun at your Canadian friends and get them riled up a bit is just tell them that people don't treat them better because they have a Canadian flag patch on their backpack. You know, if you backpack around the world, you'll see people that put their Canadian flag on their backpack and they say, oh, people treat us better because we have Canadian flags on our backpack. Well, you tell them, no, they don't. They don't treat you better because you have a Canadian flag on your backpack. They treat you better because you're nice people and nice tourists. And that's one thing you got to get across. If you're a nice tourist anywhere, people will treat you better. And Canadians are really nice, so when they travel, people like them. It has absolutely nothing to do with a flag on the back of a backpack. Now, another thing that might annoy the locals, or at least give an eye roll from them, is if you complain about the cold. Look, it's Canada. We're in the northern hemisphere, in the northern part of the northern hemisphere. It's normal for it to be cold. I'm here in the fall, and yes, I have my winter jacket on. I've got my toque in my hat, in my bag, so I can put it on when I go away, because it's chilly, okay? It gets cold here. It's a fact of life. Deal with it. Bring a toque, bring an extra sweatshirt, bring some long underwear. You'll be fine, okay? Now, another thing that kind of sets people off, and this is one of the cross-border things with the US, is if you get into any discussion about healthcare, that's kind of a touchy subject between Americans and Canadians, so I would just avoid that subject completely to avoid any kind of kerfuffles, okay? And then I think what I want to kind of end with is really something that if you do these, there might not be ever coming back. Like, your friendship with your Canadian friends might not come back, but you might not be allowed to come back to Canada if you bring up these things. And that's if, I gotta be careful, if you rip on poutine, hockey, or the local beer, oh my God, the locals will hate you forever. Because if you want to see pride in Canada, yes, I know they love their flag, they love their people, they love everything, but there's certain things. Quebec, that poutine, that is something that every Canadian loves. Doesn't matter if you're in Vancouver or PEI, poutine's everywhere and they love it, so don't diss it. If you don't know what that is, it's French fries with cheese curds on top and gravy. Oh, it's heaven on a plate, okay? That's one thing. 2, hockey. It is the national pastime. Heck, it's the national religion when you come here. And if you don't like hockey, don't tell people. You don't think hockey's fun? Don't tell people. Leave it alone. Don't rip on hockey. And God forbid, if you rip Canadian beer, especially from the US, that will not go over well. Because the beer here is really good and the locals want to make sure it stays good. So you'll notice that there's lots of local breweries everywhere throughout the country and the beer's pretty much always good, okay? So don't be ripping on any of those things. Otherwise, you could have some problems with the locals. So I hope this helps you know some things you shouldn't do if you don't want to upset your Canadian friends when you're here, if you want to be a good tourist when you're here. What are some other things that upset Canadians when tourists come to Canada? Please let us know in the comments section below, just so we can have more things so people know, so they can be better tourists when they come here, whether we're here in Toronto or in Quebec or Vancouver or wherever. Also, I'm sure someone will comment down below, be American. Look, I'm an American and everyone has been super nice to me here because, again, if you're a nice tourist, people treat you nice everywhere. And the Canadians can teach us that for traveling around the world. Anyway, I'll say bye from here in Toronto.